Deborah, with her 30 years of being an entrepreneur and creating over 7 companies, knows exactly what it means to accept the mission. When you make that decision, when you accept the mission to become a solopreneur, to take yourself and your talents to market, then you embrace a life of not only unlimited possibilities, but also the unknown. It's an elixir of fear and bravery that only someone who's taken the leap really understands. On our show, Deb digs deep with her guests to highlight what you, the listener, wants to know. The stories, the whys, and the hows to navigate the journey to success. Get ready to hear from some of the most incredible mission takers from Generation Z to Boomers. So sit up, perk up, and get ready to be blown away. Now here is your host, Deborah Drummond.
Welcome back to Mission Accepted, best audience ever. And I know that you're wondering who you are today, right? What is Deb going to come up with today? Well, you know what? You are the most informed audience today. And you're like, okay, who does she have on the show? You guys are great. Thank you for doing everything you're doing, sharing the show, commenting, and all of that. And I know a lot of you are coming and showing up on the 262 Summit, both women and men, to the most incredible run of 22 summits to inspire and bring into solidarity International Women's Day. So you guys are showing up and you're sending little messages in the chat, and we so appreciate you. Okay, look, we have a woman today that, you know what? Don't you love when you go to the doctors? Don't you just love making those appointments? I don't know about you, but I always make sure I have paper and pen because you know what? There's always things to do in the waiting room and people to meet. Anyway, so I had, an incredible experience with a breast health appointment. There you go. How's that for transparency, right? And you know what? You never know what's going to come out of a conversation when you say hi to somebody or talk about their day or get into a good conversation. And so that is how I met Dr. Paula Gordon. You're like, how did you meet your podcast guest? I went for a breast health appointment. One of those things that you put into your book. Anyways, I'm so thrilled that she has agreed to come on, because what she told me in that appointment. Now, you guys know I've been in the health field for a long time, predominantly in holistic health, and predominantly I love the lymphatic system. But there's always something you don't know. There's always something you don't know. And I love that about having impromptu conversations. But then there's sometimes when you talk to somebody and there's things that you realize that you don't know, that you really wanted to know, that you need to know, that you should know. And if you ever heard something from someone, you're like, you need to tell people about that. You need to write a book about that. You need to write an article about that. Like, how can I follow you? How can I follow you? How can I get more information about this? And how can I tell every single woman I know? And that's kind of what was running through my veins when I was in my appointment with her. First of all, let me introduce her properly. She is a clinical professor at UBC. She has recently had one of the most incredible accolades, and she has many. And if you're coming or have come to the July 8th summit for 262, you're going to get to hear her just a little bit longer than you will today. But she's been recently appointed to the Order of Canada. And that is incredible. That is really incredible. Congratulations. And so, Dr. Paula Gordon, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we're happy to have you. So look, you're in what I would call, and seems, breast health. And tell me how that came across your desk. So you decided that you were going to be a doctor, and you decided to go into this as a specialty, or something happened for you, or what was it that made you decide to go into this area of medicine?
Well, I guess I knew that I wanted to be a doctor when I was about 15 years old. And then once you make that decision, you have to work really hard at school and get good grades and so on. As I was getting towards the end of medical school, when you start to be exposed to all the different specialties in the hospitals, you rotate through, eventually become an intern. I decided I wanted to be a radiologist. Now, radiologists do all kinds of medicine, and nowadays we're all subspecialists, or many of us are, of course. And along the way, doing radiology, which involves ordinary x-rays, it involves ultrasound, CT scans, MRIs, angiography, and other interventional stuff. I decided that I wanted to be an ultrasound specialist. So I finished my training as a radiologist, did an extra year of ultrasound with the guru in Canada, and finished my ultrasound training, and I was at that point qualified to be the head of an ultrasound department somewhere. But there were no openings in my city, and I didn't want to move to another city for the job because I was married, wanted to stay in Vancouver where my husband was finishing his training. And so I morphed into a radiologist who does mammography. And in those days, there were no mammography specialists, but, radiologists did a little bit of everything, including mammograms. And so I started doing a lot of mammograms and learning a lot about mammograms. And just at the same time, the ultrasound technology was advancing to the point where we could start using ultrasound in the breast. So I had these two unlikely skill sets, which I was able to put together, and figured out breast ultrasound kind of as I was going along, because there wasn't a lot of it being done at the time. And I kept track of what I was doing and eventually published several papers in the area. And as I was doing that work, I realized that there was a potentially really important role for ultrasound to play in the breast, because when we do screening mammograms, there are some types of breast tissue that aren't very good at finding breast cancers, the other types that are really good at it. And it turned out that ultrasound filled in that gap. So I was able to publish some papers in that field. And now, of course, breast ultrasound is a very important part of not only the diagnostic stuff. So if a woman has a lump, let's say, and it doesn't show on her mammogram, she automatically needs an ultrasound. But now it's generally recognized that women who have that kind of breast tissue where mammograms aren't as good, and they'll say the word, it's called dense breast tissue, that ultrasound can find many of those cancers that are missed. So although it's really important, and so this is kind of getting into the meat of the message, it's really important that women have mammograms, and the best age to start is age 40, which is not necessarily available in all geographic locations, but the best age to start is 40. And one of the first things a woman should find out after her first mammogram is, do I have dense breasts? And if a woman has dense breasts, she really should try very hard, and it's easier in some places than others, to get additional screening with ultrasound, or in some cases, even with MRI, to give us the opportunity to find cancers earlier. And because if a woman is unlucky and is going to get a breast cancer, that's the key, is finding it as early as possible. Because, and I'm sure people all know women who've had breast cancer, and maybe even some who died of their breast cancer, but the likelihood of surviving a breast cancer, and even the likelihood of being able to have it treated without having really aggressive therapy, is much better when we find it earlier. So 2 messages right off the bat: start having a mammogram at age 40 if you can. And if you can, okay, I know you use the expression show up and stand up, advocate. We need more women to advocate. Right now, the bulk of the advocacy that's made so many improvements for women is being done by women who've already had cancer. They're not even going to benefit from these improvements. And we need women who haven't had breast cancer yet to show up and start advocating. Because I'm told the reason they're not advocating is because everybody's in denial, and they think it'll never happen to them or someone they care about. But of course, breast cancer, if you look at women's whole lifespan up to, say, 90, the likelihood of getting a breast cancer is 1 in 8. And we hear about it every time a celebrity gets breast cancer. We just heard this week that Sarah Ferguson has been diagnosed, and apparently hers was diagnosed on her mammogram. So that's great that it was. I don't know I don't know her circumstances. I don't know anything about her case, but I do know that in the UK, women can only be screened starting at 50 and every 3 years, which is really not good. Ideally it should be every year. Even where I am, women can't have a mammogram every year unless they have a first-degree relative with breast cancer. But in the UK, if she was just in the public system, that's all she would get every 3 years. So back to advocacy, women who haven't had cancer need to learn about it. And that's why I'm here right now.
Yeah.
I want to reach as many women as I can. And I do voluntarily give webinars to groups of women, and I'll put it out there right now. People can reach out to me, and if you can put 25 women together, I'm happy to give a free webinar on the basics. but we need more women to stand up and advocate so that things will get better everywhere.
So that's quite shocking, 1 in 3 years. I mean, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, there's two things that pop into my head is one, in relationship to advocacy. So someone's listening and they're like, okay, what do they do? Like, where's the first place that they go? Like, I just had, there was a health issue today and I was sending off a email to Hetty Fry, who we both live in Vancouver, Canada, and she happens to be the MP here. So what do women do? They're like, okay, I know women have had breast cancer. I mean, I don't know if I know anyone that doesn't know someone in their circle that has had it. What can they do that is the most supportive? Like, what does advocacy look like?
Well, it depends where you live. Now, you mentioned Vancouver, and okay, if Hetty is your MP, definitely. But in Canada, let's be specific now, healthcare is run by provinces. So if there's an issue that relates to health in British Columbia, you should also be getting in contact with we call them in BC, we call them MPPs, your provincial elected representative. You've got to find out who they are. And if you're sending an email, send one to your MPP, but also our health minister. And if you know what health authority you're in, if you're in Vancouver Coastal, which covers a large part of the province, or PHSA, then find out who the CEO of your health authority is and copy everybody on that letter. If somebody's in Canada and it's a breast issue, that's what I know the most about, you should get in touch with Dense Breasts Canada. And full disclosure, I'm the volunteer medical advisor, and the Dense Breasts Canada women have done so much. We've got more to do, but for example, when they started in 2017, it was an organization co-founded by 2 women who've had breast cancer, and no province was telling women in their screening mammogram report that gets mailed to them, no province was saying anything about a woman's breast density. We now have 6 that do, and 4 more have committed for the rest of 2023. In fact, Ontario is going to be in late July. So that's what they've achieved. We're now pivoting to try to get screening mammography starting at age 40 across Canada. Right now, only 4 provinces allow women to self-refer without a doctor's requisition starting at 40. Alberta starts at 45. We got to get everybody down to 40 because breast cancer starts getting more common in the 40s. The radiation risk from mammography is negligible in the 40s, so that's not a reason not to do it. But the big barrier we have in this country is a panel called the Canadian Task Force on Preventive Healthcare. They are a federally funded panel of volunteers, and those panels make guidelines on all kinds of things: breast cancer screening, prostate screening, depression screening, HPV screening for cervical cancer, hepatitis C screening, and other health concerns, developmental delay in children. And those panels have no experts on them. They're funded by the Federal Ministry of Health, and they make guidelines that aren't necessarily the best. In fact, there are multiple specialties now that have formed a kind of coalition to try to fix that problem. But when we go to the ministers of health and the cabinet and so on, they say, we're just lay people. We can't overrule an expert panel. We say, no, they're not experts. The chair of the panel that made the breast cancer screening guidelines is a nephrologist. There were no breast cancer experts, no breast radiologist, no breast surgeon, no oncologist making the guidelines. Similarly, with all of those other guidelines that I named, there are no experts. And yet the feds are afraid to say, wait a minute, we got to change the task force. We have to restructure it. In the US, when their task force came out with crappy guidelines, excuse my French, their Congress put a moratorium on them. They said, we're not going to use those guidelines. We're going to go back to the 2002 guidelines, which said women should get screened at 40. And that was really important for their Congress to do because insurance in the US doesn't cover screening if it's not approved by their task force. Well, in Canada, we don't have to worry about people paying out of pocket. But if you live, say, in Ontario and you're in your 40s and you want a mammogram, you cannot self-refer to their screening program. And women are theoretically supposed to be allowed to go to their family doctor and say, I want a mammogram. But individual doctors who read those task force guidelines, they don't read the whole paper. They read the, the part at the front, the key points. It says, don't screen women in the 40s. And GPs and nurse practitioners in Ontario whose patients come to them saying, I want a mammogram, please give me a requisition. Some of those women are being told, that's not what our guidelines say. Come back when you're 50. And there are so many tragic stories of women who were denied a mammogram and then a couple years later, still in their 40s, were diagnosed with breast cancer, and not just an early one, but an advanced breast cancer. Some of them, in fact, stage 4. And those stories are all too common. Women are contributing their stories. That's something women can do once they've had cancer, contribute their story to Dense Breast Canada. And the website is full of these tragic stories. But that's one way women can advocate. But like you said, you got to take the time. And I say this to my patients as I'm doing their needle biopsies. If you've got the energy, you waited so long for this appointment, you waited too long for this appointment, please email your MPP, email the health minister, email the CEO of your health authority. And it's not hard to just look on the internet and find out who those people are. And then send, and their email addresses are there. Send them an email. I have an expression. The politicians and the policymakers don't listen to experts, but politicians listen to voters. So your email counts when they get it from you, and you're not a doctor and you're not an expert. Counts more than when I give a talk.
No, it's very true. And sometimes I think when, it's difficult enough, I think, for people to do, it's interesting, right? I mean, not to bring doing your will into this conversation, but it's kind of like how many people you talk to that don't have their will done. It's a kind of it's a conscious denial. It's like, I don't want that to happen to me if I put any energy in it whatsoever. I just keep putting it over there because it's not, you don't want to bring it into your world. But once you get it done and you're prepared, and what we can tell you is that you're going to feel really good, because you're not just advocating for yourself, but you're advocating for your, women that you don't know. And so many of us will do that. And I talk about that a lot. I say, that's what this whole, 262 thing is about. It's like, sometimes we'll send money over to another country because we hear of women over there that are, they're making baskets, or there's something political's happened in their country. And sometimes we almost forget about ours, right? Do you know what I mean? We're very good at reaching out and donating there, or donating here, or donating here. And then sometimes we just don't do what's at home. It's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing, but it's a true thing. Is there any, so the Dense Breast, is it Dense Breast Association, or what's the name of that?
This is a nonprofit, completely volunteer run, and it's spelled Dense Breasts with an S, Canada.ca. And they have a donate button on their webpage, and people can get a tax receipt for making a donation. And those donations go towards education and advocacy. So that's my favorite charity, Dense Breast Canada.
Yeah. And wherever you're listening to this, if you're in the US, if you're in UK, I know that we have a big following over in Ireland, and ironically, Israel was one of our top. So wherever you are, I am sure there is something somewhere, someone needing something, and there's always people to write to. What can I jump in? I mean,
let me just jump in a second, because you said you have a big following from Ireland. I actually was there and gave some public lectures a few years ago, but when we were still traveling before the pandemic. And in North America, it's been standard for some time that any mammogram report, the radiologist would mention the breast density. That what was missing is the patient wasn't being told. In Ireland, the radiologist doesn't even mention the breast density. They've got a long way to go. And there are advocates in Ireland working for breast density notification, just like we started with in 2017. But because it wasn't such a foreign concept to radiologists, and we were already putting it in our dictated reports, and even sometimes our checkoff reports, once we got going with the women advocating, it happened. Ireland's got a real problem. And so, yes, if you've got listeners from Ireland, they definitely should try to help.
What is it? What do you think is the barrier here? I mean, what is it without, like, I think part of the frustration when people hear about situations like this, they're like, this is not difficult. This is, I mean, from 50 to 40, it's not difficult. I mean, sure, is economics, like women are going to be using up the services more? Like, what is the barrier
Oh,
here?
you're not going to like this. I'm so glad you asked. When, oh my goodness, decades ago. And the attitude is, if we tell women their breast density, we're going to make them anxious. It's so patronizing and condescending. Breast density is an important piece of health information. It's like knowing your blood pressure. I mean, you want to know if your blood pressure is high. It's like for some of us know our cholesterol level. It's just another piece of health information. And we don't withhold that information from women or men. But something about breast density, that in fact, so the Canadian Task Force, which is that organization that says women shouldn't be screened until 50, there's two reasons they give that they consider a risk of doing screening starting younger. And one of them is anxiety. Wow. It's not anxiety about breast cancer. It's when a woman has a screening test, and this goes for Pap tests too. Sometimes the test is not clear on its own, and you need to do some extra stuff. So a woman has a mammogram, there's a shadow on it. Maybe it's a blob of normal tissue. Maybe it's an early cancer. And so we need to do more tests. So the woman is recalled. She's called back for more tests. And when that happens, 96% of those women are told everything's fine. It was nothing, or it was something benign like a cyst. Don't worry. 4% of those women, 7% women go on to have extra tests. And of those, maybe 4 of them out of 1,000 women turn out to have cancer. Now, when women are recalled, it makes them nervous because they think, maybe I'm one of the 4 this time. And that's understandable, but that anxiety is transient. Yes, it takes too long to get the extra test done, especially now. But our task force says that transient anxiety, we have to spare women from that anxiety. So let's not even screen them. And by not screening them, we lose the opportunity to find those 4 potentially lethal cancers. Women who understand, women are told, hey, listen, go for your mammogram, but especially the first time you go, there's a chance you'll be called back. Don't panic. You'll get the extra tests and you'll find out whether it's cancer or not in good time. But is that a reason to not? In fact, that is the reason, the biggest reason our task force is concerned about, that we might make women anxious. So women need to stand up to that. And this is where the women who've had cancer are fighting back on social media. They're writing letters. I just look at the Twitter feed on this subject. They're saying, how dare you take away my opportunity to decide? Let me decide whether I'm willing to handle a little anxiety and give you the chance to find my cancer. And there's data. There's actually papers published in the peer-reviewed literature showing that women would rather know than not even be given the opportunity to have a screening. Now, to be fair, there's one other risk that is legitimate, except that it's really minor, especially for younger women. And that's something, so before I go on about the anxiety. So our task force uses the term, instead of saying a recall or a false alarm, which is a good term for it, they call it a false positive. And that's a really scary pejorative term because it makes it sound like you're going to be diagnosed with cancer when you don't really have cancer, and you're going to be treated for cancer when you don't have cancer. That's not what false positive means in the context that our task force is using it. And unfortunately, it's used all over the world, by the way. It's not just in Canada. So that's one of the risks of having a mammogram, is the possibility of a false alarm. But the other risk is something called overdiagnosis. And this is a little hard to explain because it's theoretical. And you can't even measure it directly, but it's called overdiagnosis. Now, what it means is the woman has cancer. She has a real cancer. This is not a false positive cancer, and she gets treated for it, but she dies of something else sooner than her cancer would have been a problem.
Okay.
So that's a relevant issue, but still small, only 1 to 10% in older women, because older women are more likely to get, say, a lung cancer. So they've treated for their breast cancer. A month later, they're diagnosed with lung cancer, and however long it takes, 6 months or a year later, they're dead from their lung cancer, and maybe they didn't really need that breast cancer treated because we didn't know they were going to be diagnosed with something else. Sometimes it's a heart disease. Of course, heart disease is the major killer of women. Woman gets treated for her breast cancer. A week later, she dies of a heart attack or a stroke, or gets killed in a car accident. That's overdiagnosis, but it's theoretical. And even in older women, it's not significant, but especially in younger women, because younger women don't get these competing cancers or other illnesses like heart disease as often as older women. And yet our task force is using overdiagnosis to deny screening to women in the 40s. And what you need to know about breast cancer in younger women is that it grows faster. Women who haven't gone through menopause, their ovaries are still pumping out hormones. Most hormones are hormone sensitive. So it's not that the hormones cause the breast cancer, but if you get breast cancer, it's like throwing fuel on a fire. So breast cancer in younger women, we really need to find them earlier. We need to start screening at 40. And that's for all women, but especially for racialized women. Black, Asian, and Hispanic women get breast cancer younger than white women. Their peak incidence is in the mid-40s. Caucasian women, the peak incidence, yes, it starts in the 40s, it starts climbing, but the peak incidence is in the late 50s and early 60s. So women need to be screened starting at 40. They need to be screened annually when they're younger because their cancers grow faster. So if we're going to find them smaller, we need to screen them more often. And if their breasts are dense, we need to do supplemental screening ultrasound to find those cancers when they're small.
I'm still aghast at the word anxiety. I mean, there's a lot of things that cause people anxiety. Let's not pick that apart. And look, I'm a woman who I understand. I got that letter many years ago that said, you need to come back and you need to get tested. And you kind of take a deep breath when you get the letter, because we know, right? We know. But I would, it doesn't take anything but a few moments to go, I'm glad I've got another appointment. And once you've had appointments like that or letters like that, particularly, I think if the education comes with when women first start getting screened, look, it is not going to be unusual. Don't panic. If you get a letter, that just means our medical system's working. That means we're doing our due diligence. Lucky you. Lucky you. I think about that. Lucky you, right? And so now for me, I am one of those people that go every 6 months, and, someone just took over my doctor's practice and they're like, okay, this is now, now we're booking our own appointments, which is a little funky, but that's another conversation. But it does give you a little bit of take your breath away. But I'd rather something take my breath away than take my life away.
Correct. Now, I just have to jump in on something else you just said. You're making your own appointments. So that is a big deal, because for women who need a requisition for anything, and that goes, say, for women in Ontario in their 40s who want to have a screening mammogram, there are thousands of women with no family doctor who can't get a requisition. So when women stand up and show up and advocate, I want them to advocate for self-referral starting at 40. Because if we see something on the mammogram, we'll call the patient back and do what's necessary. We'll make the diagnosis. We'll get her into the care pathway if she needs it. But she has to get into the system. And we shouldn't require women to have a physician's blessing and a requisition. They should be able to refer themselves, and we need to educate women and physicians that's necessary.
That's a big one, right? I mean, this is fairly new. I mean, I was fortunate where my doctor's practice is being taken off by someone, and they'll send a rec, and then I got to take that rec and I got to go. Where years ago, and not too many years ago, they would just say, here's your appointment, here's your time, here's your date. And you would make your world around it. Now, this is what I found interesting. I am not a young woman with kids under my knees anymore, right? So, not to say that I have more time, because we do other things, but I was always thinking, as this is changing, it's difficult enough for women to find time for themselves. I mean, let's face it, right? Whatever it is that we're doing, it seems to be more difficult to find time for us to put ourselves and our health first. That's just lineage, I think, for culture and lineage. But then now you've got to go advocate for yourself. You've got to make the appointment. You've got to find the time, and you've got to this. Where I really appreciated when my doctor called and said, your appointment's Thursday at 3. And somehow I made that happen.
Yeah.
Where I had 2 children, I had a job, I had this. I'm like, I have an appointment in it. And it became a very top priority. And I worry about women putting it to the side and putting it to the side and putting it to the side and not getting to it in time.
Except wouldn't it be better if your physician gave you the requisition and said, phone and make your own appointment, and
Yes.
then you'll get it at a time when it's convenient? Because that happens to me too. Even as a physician, I'm told I have an appointment. It's no, I can't make that. I've got a clinic then. And so much time is wasted by these appointments being made.
Yeah.
And then the woman has to phone back and say, I have to change the time because.
Yeah. No. There's so much to do. There's been so many things that we have shared that I think really have opened up. Like, again, like I'm still stuck on once every 3 years, like what? Like, and why is this not of importance? I mean, this is not an uncommon incident. This is not something that people rarely talk about. I talk to a lot of people in the health field, and I've always had empathy for those cancers that don't get a lot of attention, that people don't do walks for and runs for and donations for, and people leave money in their will for. And I think about it because they're rare, and people haven't heard a lot about them. There's no excuse on this one, particularly for, rule makers or rule changers. It's like, you've had people in your life, people in your life. And where did it get okay to have people making decisions that don't have experience? Like, I don't know any other industry that would do that, including things like marketing. Do you know what I mean? Like marketing or telecommunications, or someone would never come here and lay wires or fiber optics for my internet with some experience, make people making decisions. I don't understand how a task force is put together for certain health conditions with no requirements. I mean, you can't get a job without a resume.
Yep. Well, and they're inconsistent because when COVID came along, the feds put together a task force of infectious disease experts and vaccination rollout experts. So they did experts for that, but they don't do it for cancer screening.
That alone needs advocacy, right? That alone. So,
well, right now, as I said, we need to fix our task force. And in fact, it's only in the last couple of months that the health minister announced $500,000 for our task force to expedite their next review of the breast cancer screening guidelines. But until they fix the structure and procedures of the task force, they're just going to do it again. They're just going to say, we're going to cherry pick the evidence that we want to support. Instead of looking at all the evidence and then coming to a good decision, they're going to choose the evidence, and nobody's there to stop them. There are no experts attending that can control the outcome. And they could make the same mistakes all over again. And what's this $500,000 for?
How did they get appointed? Like, who appoints them? And can someone apply to be appointed?
Yes, you can apply to be appointed. And in fact, one of my colleagues who is a very much a breast cancer expert applied, and she was rejected and told she can't be on the task force because she's an expert. And that means she's biased. So the task force, I know the task force is completely arm's length. They decide who they're going to invite to be on their panels. They decide what health issue they're going to look at next. They decide what evidence they're going to use to study to come to their conclusions. But not only that, they don't even necessarily understand the evidence they're choosing. They pick off a list of what evidence, and then they hand it to 2 evidence review panels. Now, this is one step further away from patients. These are bean counters, and I think it's University of Calgary and University of Ottawa, the 2 evidence review centers. And then they come out with this draft guideline. And when it's already in the draft form, then they send it to certain experts, and they don't have to accept the input the experts give them. In fact, in the latest round, we're aware, not from breast cancer screening, because they haven't gotten this far yet in this newly funded expedited review, but for an expert to participate, they have to sign a confidentiality agreement, and they cannot withdraw their signature even if they disagree with the final guideline. So imagine if I were asked that, do I want my name on a guideline where they ignored my input? If the next guideline says start at 50 and I can't even have my name withdrawn, why would I even want to participate? And we know this is what happened last time, because I was one of the people consulted and many of my colleagues were, and we know that everything we sent them was ignored. So I'd like to say I'm optimistic about this next guideline review, but even the two co-chairs of the panel have been tweeting and on social media saying they don't see any reason to change the guidelines.
Wow. Do they not know anyone that's had breast cancer? Do they not know anyone?
Okay. It's so funny you would ask that, because one of the co-chairs tweeted, I'm very familiar with, how terrible it is to have breast cancer because someone I loved or someone I cared about had breast cancer and she didn't want to go have any testing when she found a lump. And I supported her in her decision. And then when she was finally diagnosed, she didn't want treatment. And I supported her in her decision. And I think women should have choice. And I tweeted back at him, women should have the choice to be screened so their cancers can be found before they're big enough to feel. Like he's talking about a woman who already has a lump. And I said, if you really care about choice, let women have the choice starting at 40 and self-refer. But this is what's going on social media. I mean, this is public, right?
Yeah.
And they've already declared their biases, and they're saying I'm biased.
Wow.
No, if you gave permission, if women could self-refer at 40, nobody's going to force them to go. Right. That's what real choice is. If you don't want to have a mammogram, that's okay. And you know what? If you show up in my office with a lump, you're going to be treated kindly, and you're going to have, all the standard care. But don't take away a woman's choice.
Yeah. Wow. So we obviously wanted to be able to have you come on to the show, and we know that we have you coming on to speak for these exact reasons. This is exactly what I was talking about when I was getting, when you were my doctor and doing your procedure and we were having this conversation, my mouth was just dropping and that's how this works. It's interesting, right? As we go through school and they're like, education is power and education is power. And I don't know if at 16 years old or even at 20 years old, I really understood that, but I sure in heck understand it, because just the one person telling one person and one person telling one person, it's so powerful. And it gets shocking. I think that's where that's where some of the non-movement comes from, because people think, how can I really make a difference? But we know one person can make a difference, but it sounds so cliche. It sounds so Hallmark. I know that I'm a big advocate of Amnesty International, and I was at the office and, we were writing a letter, and I literally I've been a member since I was 17. So this is not yesterday. And so, but I was writing a letter like last month, and I turned to Don, who's been there. God bless him. He's been there like from the beginning. And I said, what do you say to someone when they ask about, does one letter make a difference? And he's just like, let me answer that question. Right. And because we get it asked often, and it was like, we see the results of letters, even when we write a letter. And sometimes we don't really associate our letter to being the one that tipped it, but there's something called a tipping point. We all know tipping point. If you know Malcolm Gladwell, you'll know tipping point, where that's one thing that tips it over. And he goes, and not only does it make a difference on, we're writing to governments as well, obviously for different reasons around human rights. And so he says, not only does one letter, 10 letters, 100 letters, 1,000 letters start to make impact, but the person that you're writing about, they know. And it's like people that have breast cancer, people that are fighting for breast cancer, people that are donating, people that are volunteering, when they see people writing letters, it actually fuels them to go do what we need them to do. So it's not only about trying to make that change, It's writing that letter. And it's really not even about making ourselves feel better, but it's about the impact that the collective have that inspire the people, that it's their main cause, right? That it's their main cause. So so there you go, people. One letter, one phone call, one donation. We know it makes a difference, but sometimes also when a topic is so close to home and it can be actually a fear of yours, I think it can stop you.
Can I go back to that point? Because you made it before and you said people are afraid that if they put energy towards something, they don't want to do that. They don't want to. And I need to explain one other point because I sort of glossed over it before. And that's that for some women, somebody in their life had breast cancer and had a mastectomy. And that's obviously a terrifying prospect. Or somebody had breast cancer treatment and now they've got a swollen hand and arm, which is called lymphedema, which is a side effect of one of the procedures that's done to stage the cancer and look for spread to the lymph nodes. Or somebody knows somebody who went through chemotherapy and lost their hair, and how hard that was on that woman to wait for her hair to come back. What women need to know is that those are all avoidable. Not nowadays, it's much less likely that women will need a mastectomy. Breast cancer can be treated with a much smaller operation called a lumpectomy that can leave almost no scars. And women who do have breast cancer can be treated without that armpit operation that will lead to the swelling in the hand and arm. And women, if their cancer is diagnosed early and it's not spread to the lymph nodes, a lot of women now can avoid chemotherapy. So women need to know that all this stuff that's terrifying is potentially avoidable if we diagnose cancer early. And that's why women should go for all those screening tests and risk the anxiety of a recall, all so that they don't have to go through that. And it doesn't work for every woman. Of course, there are going to be women diagnosed later for various reasons. I mean, some cancers are very rapidly growing, but the majority are in that intermediate range where there's time to make the diagnosis and do the less aggressive treatment. So in fact, that's one of the issues of the task force. The only benefit that they considered when they balanced what they called the benefits and the risks was saving a life. And we know that early detection saves lives, but it also saves aggressive therapy. So women need to know that it's not going to necessarily be the same course that they saw someone else go through if we can find it early.
Fantastic. What a beautiful way to end. Can you please give us again the place where in Canada, and if you're not from Canada, I'm sure you can find an organization similar in your area. Where is that, where people can donate and find more information?
So in Canada, the organization is Dense Breasts Canada. That's with two breasts, .ca. In the US, they've been at this 10 years longer than we have. And in fact, the FDA has made it so that all women in the US will be told their breast density, will be told about breast density and how supplemental screening can be beneficial. So they're way ahead of us. Women in the States are currently still being screened at 40. And in fact, now that their task force has changed their guidelines or is in the process of changing their guidelines, they're good. Canada, women in provinces that don't currently allow them to self-refer at 40 need to go to their family doctor, and they need to advocate for themselves. We still have a problem for women who don't have a family doctor or nurse practitioner. But if you're unlucky enough to live in one of those provinces, write your MPP or MLA and write your MP and write any cabinet ministers you can think of, including the health minister. There is an advocate in Ireland, and I think her Twitter handle is being dense. I'm not 100% sure, but that's where the Irish people can go. And in the UK, the advocate is Cheryl Crewis. She's an interesting lady. I've forgotten her Twitter handle off the top. I can maybe give it to you for the liner notes. But she actually lives in France, where any woman with dense breasts is automatically called back to have an ultrasound, and she's trying to get that done now in the UK. But they need all the help they can get on the other side of the pond.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing with us today, and thank you for informing us today, and thank you for making us, honestly, you're stepping up. That's not an issue. So we're going to step up and support staff, stand up and speak up. That's what this whole seminar series that we're doing is about. And come listen more on July 8th. Thank you so much. You guys are most incredible listeners. I know that you're going to share. I know that you're going to comment. Please feel free to ask any personal questions that you like. Sometimes this brings up personal questions. You guys know where we are, deb@debdrummond.com. And if you would like to be sitting where Dr. Paula Gordon is sitting and share what you have to say, then you know what, you know where to reach out. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Mission Accepted today. You guys be well and stay good. See you again soon. Bye for now.